PowerPoint presentation which I had shared. So I would like to ask maybe Biswasri that if you can describe the findings which you can see in this slide. Anything if you can just unmute and tell that what is visible here. So this was case one, a 20 years female, pain abdomen, mildly elevated OTPT. So SGOT and SGPT are mildly elevated. So can you highlight what can you see here?
Ma'am, this is a H&E stained section of liver biopsy showing normal liver architecture with very mild inflammation in the ductal area.
So what is the structure in the center? So what do you think that this is which area? So yes, it looks like normal liver. Now what is this area? Can you make out whether it's a central area or a portal area?
Rajni, can
Ma'am,
you use the laser pointer?
Yes, sir.
That'll be helpful. Thank you.
So in the center, so what is this structure? So is it a central area, a zone 3 area, or a zone 1 area?
ma'am, I'm not very sure. Maybe this is zone 3. This looks like a bile duct to me.
Okay, so this structure actually it looks like a vein. Okay, and maybe okay. And see now compare that with this area. So this is the second image. So what do you think? What is this area
Yes.
in the center?
Ma'am, this is the portal triad
Yeah.
showing
So what
mild
it is
mono.
consisting of? Yeah.
Ma'am, here we can see the duct and the vein and probably the artery in the center and mononuclear infiltrate surrounding that.
Yeah, good. And the is it going out of the portal area, or do you think that this is pretty a normal kind of a portal area in a biopsy?
Ma'am, it appears to be normal. It is not going much away from the portal area,
Yeah, that's
confined.
good. So that's very correct. So that's the higher part of the again the lobule. Again, so I think it looks fine. And so, can you identify now this stain? So Mason's trichrome, what it is highlighting? It does it look normal or abnormal?
Ma'am, this also appears to be almost normal. There, it is only
Okay.
the portal area showing a little bit of fibrosis, which is normal.
Yes. Okay. And then this is the lobular area. So this also appears fine. Okay. So I'll just get the complete PowerPoint of this. So this was what I had shared with you. So I'll go to the main presentation. Okay. So today's slide seminar, so that's the first slide seminar, our liver series. So I'll be talking about normal liver, that's why in detail, before going to the fatty liver disease, which is the main topic of today. So let's just revise a little normal anatomy of the liver. So if we talk about the macro anatomy of liver, so everybody knows that it has two major lobes, so right lobe and the left lobe. If we see the liver from the front, and there is a small caudate and the quadrate lobe at the back of the liver. And in the on the front, so how the right and left are divided from each other. I'll just change the pointer. So the falciform ligament, so extension of that divides the liver into these two lobes. And if we see at the back, so the main gateway of the liver is there, where we have our venous and the arterial supply and the GB, so where the biliary drainage, so the bile is drained and stored in the gallbladder, and then it goes into the bile duct. So that's the major gateway of the liver with which everything happens. So if we see other the unique things of liver is that it has these functional segments. So why these are known as functional segments, the eight segments of liver, is that the every segment has an independent arterial, venous, and the biliary pedicle. So if we see, so they are arranged in a clockwise fashion. So if you go from left to right, so the left lobe actually has 2, 3, and 4 segment. So the lateral portion is the segment 2 and 3, and the medial portion of the left is the segment 4. If we see the right, so that is composed of 5, 6, again 7 and 8. So these four segments. So that's from the interior aspect. And so if you go towards posterior, so you will have majority of 6 and 7. Now, so these are very, very important, especially for the surgeon, because since they are independent functioning units, so you can take them out once there is a small space occupying lesion in any of the segment. And again, then if the lesion extends beyond the segment, so what can be done is, so you receive these kind of specimens for the neoplastic lesions, especially. So you will have this like left lateral segmentectomy or a medial segmentectomy. If there is a big lesion involving this whole of the area, so a left hepatectomy can be done. Similarly, a right posterior or anterior segmentectomy and a right hepatectomy when the whole right is removed, all these four segments. And then even a extended right or a extended left when the whole of the one lobe and a portion, two segments of the other, is removed, so that becomes a left extended and a right extended. So this anatomical resections are very, very important, and so that's why this anatomy becomes very important, especially for the surgeon. And for us also it is important, because when you get these resection specimens, and in today's era you have these transplant specimens also, so we have to see these vascular and the biliary pedicle margins once these kind of segmental resections they come. Then, if we look at again, the unique things about liver is that the outflow is actually through this central vein, and there are three branches. So there is a right hepatic vein, there is a middle, and the left. So if you see, so see, middle is dividing the right and the left. So it is in between the two lobes, and then the majority of the right is supplied with the right hepatic vein and left with the left. But if so, if one vein is blocked, so still the other veins compensate for that. But if two or more veins are blocked, so you call it a hepatic venous outflow tract obstruction. Now, where does these hepatic veins go into? So they drain into the inferior vena cava, and subsequently we go to the heart and the pit. So if there is obstruction which is at the level of hepatic vein or the heart or the pericardium, so they will induce similar features in the liver biopsies. So that is about the outflow. If we look at the inflow, that how the blood supply comes into liver. So it has a dual blood supply. So one is the portal vein, which gives the blood. Second is the hepatic artery. So if you look at the arterial supply, see, hepatic artery comes from the aorta, but there can be a lot of these anatomical variations. So yes, you do have sometimes accessory arteries, and the main artery arising from the other artery rather than the main aorta. So those kind of anatomical variations are again very, very important to identify. Again, for the surgeon they are very important, and also for the hepatologist. Then this portal vein, how does it form? So it forms from a combination of superior mesenteric and the splenic vein. Now, this dual blood supply, so that is a unique point of the liver. So, uh, every organ doesn't have a supply like that. And so that is like macro. If you go into the microscopic anatomy, so there are like two models by which you can understand the microscopic anatomy of liver. And these are like hypothetical models. So they are like basically something which has led to an understanding of the architecture, but it is not exactly the same in the body. So, but if we look at these models, so this is the one is the hexagonal or the lobular model, and the second is the SNR model. So, what we most commonly follow for learning the normal anatomy is this hexagonal or the lobular model, at the center of which again you have this outflow. So, that's the terminal hepatic vein in which the blood is draining and it is going out. And at the six corners of this hexagon, if you see, so you have portal areas. So where you have this again hepatic artery and the portal vein from which the blood is coming into the liver, and this is the bile duct. So where the bile gets drained. So if you look in between the central and the portal area, so these are the hepatocyte cords which are placed in this irregular or a zigzag fashion, and in between the hepatocyte cords you have again the sinusoids which have the blood supply. So this will see like if you see in this form, so there is a central vein at the center of the lobule, and then portal areas are there at the six corners. So this is the inflow, and that is the central vein is the outflow. So if we look at the portal area, so that means the hepatocytes which are closest to the portal area, they are mostly it is the they are actually the best perfused. And if you look at the hepatocytes which are away from that, so they are closer to the central vein, So they have the least blood supply. So the inflow is because here. So that means if there is a hypoxia or there is some problem with the blood supply, so these will die first. Then these so bile duct always so accompanies a vein and arteriole in the portal area. But yes, in a biopsy, in all areas you may not see three structures, and yes, there can be multiple structures also visible. So you can have like multiple veins or arterioles or the ducts visible. So there can be a number like up to three also. So these zones are important because every disease follows a zonal pattern. So that's why you need to remember these zones. Zone 3 closest to the central vein and zone 1 closest to the portal area. In between you have the zone 2. Then if we actually see the hepatocyte plate and the sinusoids, so these sinusoids are lined by this sinusoidal endothelium. Now how different this sinusoidal endothelium is from the regular endothelium? That this is a fenestrated endothelium, so it's a incomplete kind of endothelium. And then in between this endothelium and the hepatocytes you have this space which is not visible in the normal liver biopsy, but in pathological states it does get expanded. This space is known as space of Disse. In this space you have these quiescent cells which are known as ito cells. They store vitamin E, and once there is a chronic liver disease, so these become activated and they become like myofibroblast, and then they lay down. There is this laying down of the collagen fibers in this space. So that's how the fibrosis starts in the chronic liver diseases. And other than this myofibroblastic transformation, so you have more and more influx of the inflammatory cells. Your Kupffer cells also get activated, so there are more of these cytokines and interleukin secretion. And so there are like different things which operate at the same level. So you have this myofibroblastic conversion of the stellate cells, you have the Kupffer cell activation, then you have influx of the inflammatory cells, and then they release the cytokines. So there is a destruction of the hepatocytes. So this, when once this damage goes in a cycle mode, so it keeps on going on and it becomes chronic, and it can also lead to a acute on chronic picture and a more and more hepatic decompensation. So now, how do these people actually land up to the clinicians? See, there can be different scenarios. So one scenario is that people become symptomatic when there is too much of a damage to liver, because liver is having a huge reserve. So the symptoms are not going to appear unless there is a very advanced damage. So the other common scenario is that they so yes, in today's era, so you do get this LFT done, liver function test done, and on there is a abnormality. So that is another scenario by which people are asymptomatic, but because of the altered LFT they land up to the gastroenterologist or hepatologist. So this diagram is from Robbins, and this is very simple to understand, so that's why I have put it here. That how do these enzymes get altered? So see, if the hepatocyte integrity is being compromised, so hepatocytes are damaged, so you will have an elevation of either AST, ALT, or a LDH. Then if your biliary excretory function is hampered, so what is going to be abnormal? The total bilirubin, and then you need to look at the direct fraction of that. Then the urine bilirubin can be elevated, serum bile acids can be altered, and then when the canalicular membrane is damaged, then alkaline phosphatase and the gamma glutamyl transpeptidase increase. So these are quite specific for the biliary injury. Then how to make out that the liver is damaged on a long term basis or a chronic? Then the hepatocyte synthetic function has to be looked in. How that is to be seen? So serum albumin and the PT and the PTT, so they will be altered when there is a chronic liver disease. Again, the serum ammonia, this gets altered when there is a very severe liver disease. So hepatic encephalopathy, it is abnormal. So it tells you that the disease is quite severe. So nowadays, so what kind of liver biopsies you may actually see in your practice? So the conventional is the percutaneous core biopsy, which is done always under ultrasound guidance. Nowadays, there is a approach by the radiologist and the hepatologist for doing a plugged liver biopsy. That means the tract of that biopsy is plugged so that there is no bleeding from that site. So that is known as so that's a modification of the core biopsy with a plugging. Then the patients who have ascites, in which you cannot go for this USG kinded core biopsy, so transjugular, that means through the jugular vein, you do a liver biopsy in these patients. Then another new thing which has come in recent years is a endoscopic ultrasound guided liver biopsy. Now, endoscopic ultrasound, that means you are going through the esophagus. So you go through esophagus and the stomach and then approach the liver. Now, this biopsy is why this needs to be done. So it is a costly procedure, but now what are the advantages of this is that if you are doing a therapeutic procedure, maybe in the bile ducts or the liver, you want to remove some stones, or you want to dilate, or you want to put a stent. So if you have a therapeutic procedure, so yes, it is good to go for this kind of a liver biopsy. Moreover, with the EUS guided liver biopsy, you can approach both right and the left lobe, because in the other biopsies you are mostly sampling the right lobe. So in EUS you have an added advantage that the left lobe is also sampled. Now, which patients are sampled nowadays? So, over the years, the indication of the biopsies have really changed. Like when I was a resident, so out of 100 biopsies, so 90 used to be from the viral hepatitis patients. So now we are in an era when the viral markers and the viral titers are available. So you have this uh, uh, DNA, RNA, even quantification, exact viral titers. So you don't need a biopsy from the viral hepatitis patients. Then, so it has gradually changed. Then again, you have non-invasive investigation. So like you have a fibroscan, so where you can estimate the amount of the fibrosis non-invasively, you can see the amount of fat. So yes, every patient doesn't need a biopsy. So who need a biopsy? So the people who have a significant alteration of the LFT, and then you know that the disease is turning chronic and you want to confirm the etiology. So yes, in those cases, you want to go for a biopsy. What stains to do for liver biopsy? So these 4 stains which I have put here, so these are by default done at our center on every liver biopsy. But if you ask me which are essential out of this, so I will say that one HNE and one Mason's trichrome is essential. So that's minimum, and that can solve most of your cases of the liver biopsies. So a PAS D and retic may be skipped so they are not required in every case. They may be skipped. So this is the normal liver on the microscopy. So this I showed you that the central vein is at the so in the center of the biopsy. If you just think about that, how is the hexagonal arrangement in the liver biopsy? So it looks like that, and the portal area at the edge. So the hepatocytes which are closer to the portal area, those you call as zone 1 hepatocytes, and then zone 3, this is closer to the terminal. So divide like one third, one third, one third. So the middle one third is the zone 2. So that was the case which I had given you. So very nicely you have picked up that it was a normal liver biopsy. So it's a normal central vein at the center and at the higher part. So we can say, see, normally it is thin, but yes, as compared to other veins, the central vein of liver may have little thickness, which is normal for this vein. And here, though it is appearing quite thin. And then this is a reticulin stain. Now, what it is highlighting, so if you see these fibers, these blackish fibers, so these pale areas are the hepatocyte cords. So see, this, when we draw the hepatocytes in our undergraduate days, so we draw them in the straight cords. But in practice, so they are never straight. In the normal liver, they are arranged in this zigzag or the Chinese letter pattern of the cords. So see, they are little irregular. So and then these are kept in place by these reticulin fibers. Now, the reticulin fibers, why they are important to see is that in tumors you have loss of these fibers, and if there is a necrosis or a collapse of the hepatocytes in acute liver failure, if there is a chronic liver disease when there is collagenization, then these fibers will come close to one another, parallel to one another, and they will condense. So the increase of the fibers, the condensation and the parallel arrangement is abnormal. Again, the loss of fibers is also abnormal. So this is the normal framework which you should keep in your mind. Then this is the Mason's trichrome highlighting the normal central vein. That's a normal again portal area. So that's the duct. So it has a cuboidal epithelium. Look at the vein. Vein has a bigger lumen and a thin endothelium. So this is also the part of vein. So these 3 structures. And the arterioles are small. They have a thicker wall and a smaller lumen. And then this is the connective tissue of the portal area. So it depends upon the which portal area you are looking at. So see in liver, if you will see, so you have smaller, intermediate sized and the larger portal areas. So the amount of the connective tissue and the size of these structures will vary as per the size of the portal area. So if you have a bigger portal area, so you are going to see bigger arteries and the bigger veins and the bigger ducts and more connective tissue. Again, this infiltrate is normal. So these are some resident lymphocytes which are normally seen in the portal area. And now look at this adjacent to the portal area. So the plate of the hepatocytes, which is immediately in contact. So this is known as limiting plate. Now this is very, very important. So if your limiting plate is damaged, so that means you know that there is a chronic disease. So here it is very, very intact. And then at the higher part also you can see, so hepatocytes are fairly unremarkable, which are adjacent to this portal area. And now the duct and the vein and the arteriole, so they are much nicely visible at the higher part. Again, see higher part, reticulin. So see, you can make out this is the portal area. So these are your structures, these are the veins and the arteriole and the duct which was you were seeing. So that's the reticulin pattern in the portal area, and that is the reticulin pattern in the lobular area. So that's a normal Mason trichrome. So normal amount of connective tissue, no fibrosis. Again, no fibrosis at the higher part. So see the advantages of MT. So yes, other than fibrosis, you can look at the structures. So structures are much highlighted rather than a HNE stain. So that is the advantage of different spatial stains. A normal lobule, so hepatocytes, cords, and see the sinusoids. So at the most in the normal liver, you may have circulating RBCs. You do have sometimes circulating inflammatory cells. And see the space of Dissay is never visible. So in a normal liver, you don't see that. This is the endothelial cell. Again, these are endothelial cells, and you may see little these occasional Kupffer cells. But the endothelium and the hepatocyte membrane, that is immediately in contact with each other. Now this is a pass with diastase. See again, no lipofuscin, no spheroid, nothing is visible. So it is pale. So that means it is completely normal. So there is no focus of destruction here. Now see this pass. So why we do pass with diastase in the liver? Because liver is normally full of glycogen. So see, that is a normal periodic acid shift, and it is deeply magenta. So that means this is all glycogen. And now with diastase, it all has gone. So that tells you that again, now you can see some things which are pass positive and diastase resistant. So we do that because we want to look at the spheroid or the lipofuscin, which is a wear and tear pigment. So if that is present, so that will be highlighted with pass with diastase. Again, the alpha-1 antitrypsin disease inclusions, they are seen in this stain. So this stain is required for some specific situations. Then a normal lobule in the MT. Now, if we look at the spatial stains, so I told you about the reticulin. So reticulin is actually staining these type 3 collagen fibers. So I told you it is very, very important in cases to differentiate between necrosis and fibrosis. And also for the regenerative hyperplasia, it is important. Then for the fibrosis, I have showed you Mason's trichrome. You can also do, if possible, other than that. So there are like many stains which can replace each other. So you can do a serious red, or you can do this hematoxylin von Giesen. So for the fibrosis or the type 1 collagen, you can do these stains. And then Orcine is a stain which highlights the copper associated protein. So that is one usage. So in the Wilson's and chronic cholestasis, you have copper associated protein deposition. Then Orcine also highlights hepatitis B viral inclusions. Then another use of Orcine is elastic fibers. So once you want to differentiate between how much is the acute damage and the chronic damage, so you take help of this Orcine stain and see the elastic fibers. Then pass, and the pass with diastase I told you. And pearl stain, yes, at times you need to highlight the hemosiderin, like the children with thalassemia. So you can get a liver biopsy to grade the amount of iron and the fibrosis. So in those situations, the pearl stain is to be ordered. Then, so that was about the spatial stains. Then there are some basic terminologies which are followed in the non-neoplastic liver biopsies. So some of the most important of those I'll just be going through. So one is apoptosis. See, apoptotic body in liver. So it does look like it as it looks at some other location. So it's like a pink condensed cytoplasm with a small pycnotic nucleus, and but it is known with several names in liver. So Consilman body or the acidophil body are the other names for the apoptosis. Then what is ballooning degeneration? So if the hepatocytes, they are swollen, they are enlarged, and their cytoplasm becomes degenerated, so that is known as a ballooning degeneration. But if there is a bile deposition in those cells, so that is known as a feathery degeneration. So that is the difference between ballooning degeneration and the feathery degeneration. Then the stasis of the bile, where do you see it? So the bile flow starts from the canaliculi. So you can see it in the canaliculus. Then you can see it in the form of this granular cytoplasm in the hepatocytes, or you can see it in the ducts or the ductules. Then what do you call as ductopenia? So if you have reduced ducts, especially if 50% of the portal areas don't show ducts, so you should call it as a ductopenia. So duct destructive diseases, which can be, so these can be acquired diseases, and even there can be a congenital paucity of the ducts also. So the number of duct is again very very important. Then what is interface hepatitis? So I have shown you the limiting plate of the hepatocytes. If that limiting plate is damaged with the inflammation, so you call that as interface hepatitis, and that is a classical feature which tells you that the process is a chronic hepatitis. Then what is Mallory-Denk body? So it is like a degenerated cytokeratin filament. So cytoplasm, it degenerates and it combines with the heat shock protein to form a ropey structure. Then onion skin fibrosis, it is something like, so the peels of the onion, a concentric fibrosis around the duct is known as onion skin fibrosis. Then satellitosis, if the neutrophils, they surround a degenerated swollen hepatocyte, so that is known as satellitosis. So steatosis, I think you all well are aware of. So presence of fat vacuole, but once it is greater than 5%, it becomes pathological. So that will be a steatosis. Then what is bridging fibrosis? So bridge in liver means that there is a bridge which is connecting one area to another. So it can connect a central area to central. That means one zone 3 to another zone 3. It may connect one zone 3 to zone 1, so central portal, or a portal. So if any two areas are connected by fibrosis, so you will call it a bridging fibrosis. So that's the one of the questions. So everybody can answer. You can put in the message or the chat box. And so, what is this stain? So the stain highlighted here. So, anyone, the first two students who were describing, so can you, any one of you, tell that which is this stain out of Orcine, Rhodanine, Mason Fontana, or the Prussian blue? Biswasri or Neha?
Ma'am, I think it is Persian blue.
Yes, so its name is telling, so it's Prussian blue. So in Prussian blue, you get this red background and the hemosiderin, so that becomes blue. Now, when you see hemosiderin deposition, you should always see that where it is deposited. So it can be in the hepatocytes, it can be in the Kupffer cells or the reticuloendothelial system, and sometimes it is there in the veins, arteries, or the bile duct. Then the amount of the deposition is also very, very important. So you have to quantitate that and tell that. So in thalassemic patients, again, it is important. Then hemochromatosis or hemosidrosis due to other reasons. So this is very important, that in which location it is and what is the amount. Then orcine, I told you, that is for the copper associated protein. Rhodanine is for the copper, and Mason's Fontana, so that is for the melanin. So we'll go to the second case. The next two students.
हाँ हाँ हो हो हो
So So the next two students, so we'll go to the next case. Yeah. So the case 2. So Mayank, I think you can start describing. So that was the history: 30 years female, a diabetic patient, hepatomegaly, and a raised OTPT. So what can you see here?
And this is an HND section which shows multiple liver tissue cores with mostly preserved lobular architecture. A large proportion of these hepatocytes are showing macrovesicular steatosis, with variably sized vacuoles which are displacing the nucleus to the periphery, ma'am.
Yes, good. So we'll go to the next part. So is anything more highlighted here?
Here we can see that a few of these hepatocytes are also showing ballooning degeneration, which is characteristically showing enlarged cells with pale rarefied cytoplasm.
Yeah, so
when
that's
we
the
can
more
see a
higher part.
Mallory hyaline body inside this ballooning hepatocyte with
Yes,
ballooning degeneration.
yes, very nice. Anything else?
Apart,
So ballooning, steatosis, this Mallory, and what is this?
then we can see inflammation surrounding these cells with ballooning degeneration. It is a mixed inflammatory infiltrate composed of neutrophils, lymphocytes, plasma cells. However, there is no neutrophil satellitos around this hepatocyte with ballooning degeneration.
Yeah. And so that is the higher part of this again. So he has beautifully highlighted. And so that's the pass with diastase of this case. So what it is highlighting here?
I think it is. It looks like it is highlighting the Kupffer cells because it is outside the hepatocytes.
Yeah, so these are the macrophages actually. So that infiltrate the inflammatory infiltrate, it has some macrophages, and
Yes,
this is the spheroid. So lipofuscin or the spheroid. And reticulin, do you have any alteration in this reticulin pattern here?
ma'am. It is looking mostly normal, ma'am. It was.
Yeah, mostly normal, just maybe a see where the fat vacuoles they are more. So maybe you have like little reduced kind of reticulin. So
Yes, ma'am.
when you have too much of fat, so in those areas it will get little altered. Okay.
Yes.
So I'll go to the so very nicely described, Dr. Mayank. So we will go with the same slides. We'll have some more photos. So this is he has described. So yes, at the low part, it's a steatotic pattern. I think everybody can easily pick up that it's predominantly steatotic pattern. So we have these pale areas. Now, if we talk about steatosis, so what is important? So I think every resident, what comes to their mind is that what is macrovesicular and what is microvesicular. See, if there is a vacuole which you can easily identify, you can draw a line around. So that means that is macrovesicular. And microvesicular, that is something like a foamy degeneration. So you feel that the hepatocytes are swollen and they are pale, but you cannot draw a line around those vacuoles. So that becomes a microvesicular. But in the macrovesicular, over the years, the concept has come that there is a small droplet macro and there is a large droplet macro. So small droplet macro, so maybe you can see like vacuoles. So let's go at higher part. So you have see these big vacuoles which are displacing the nuclei, and then you have these small vacuoles which are not displacing the nuclei. So this is small droplet and this is a large droplet. And then if we see again at the higher part, this he has beautifully shown. So these are ballooned hepatocytes. So look at their cytoplasm, they are enlarged, and see at their cytoplasm that is rarefied. So a swollen hepatocyte with a rarefied cytoplasm, and this is a ill-formed early kind of a Mallory tank body. But see, this is visible just in few cells. So you have a lot of macrovesicular steatosis, which is large droplet macrovesicular. Then you have some of these ballooned hepatocytes, and then little Mallory-Denk body, and then you have this accompanying inflammation. So this inflammation actually is having some lymphocytes, some macrophages, and occasional neutrophils, eosinophils, and occasional plasma. So a combination of these features, and see if we go back, so zonation. So these are portal areas. So there is some zone which is free around the portal area. So that means the disease is mainly focusing on the zone 3 and zone 2. So that if I tell you that this patient is diabetic or obese or is having an altered BMI, so we know that the diagnosis of NAFLD is for sure. So yes, the clinical scenario is important. So it is a NAFLD kind of a pattern, but in the appropriate clinical scenario, this will become diagnostic. Now, what else you can see in this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is that, like this nuclear glycogenization, the clearing of the nuclei. Again, diabetics also tend to have this nuclear glycogenization. So, if you will see all biopsies, so yes, in most of your NAFLD cases, you will find glycogenization, which can be focal or which can be more prominent. Then again, if you look at the type of the inflammation in NAFLD, so these are the spheroid-laden macrophages, which I was highlighting with the pass with diastase. See, they are histiocytes and they have this light pale brown kind of color. So this is lipofuscin. Then another thing you can see with rupture of the fat vacuoles, you can have these lipogranulomas. Now, lipogranulomas, they are small and they are around this fat. So you have to differentiate these lipogranulomas from the classical tubercular or sarcoidal granulomas, because yes, in our country we tend to have these dual diseases on liver because this is a lifestyle associated disease. So this may be seen in conjunction with a regular granulomatous tuberculosis or sarcoidosis. So when you see a granuloma, always look at that whether it is small, it is big, whether it has necrosis, and in which region it is, whether it is lobular around the fat or whether it is portal, whether they are large or multiple. So all those things have to be looked in. So this was spheroid-laden macrophages. Again, little alteration of the reticulin. Now, once you have made the diagnosis that it is a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, what does the clinician expect from you? So a scoring and this grading and the staging. So grading depends upon three factors. One is steatosis, ballooning, and lobular. You add the scores of all three and that's the total score. The staging is, so that is the fibrosis. So if you see, so see zero steatosis. So if it is less than 5%, it is zero. If it is less than 33, so it becomes S1. If it is up to 66, so 33 to 66, it is S2. More than 66, it is S3. Similarly, if you see few ballooned hepatocytes, it is B1. If you have many ballooned hepatocytes, so it becomes B2. Similarly, the lobular inflammation you see under 20x bar. So if you have less than 2 foci, so you have L1. If 2 to 4 focus of inflammation, L2. If more than 4 focus in 20x, that means L3. So you add up all these three, so that will be your grade. Then the fibrosis, so it has so there are several systems. So this system I'm showing, so this is most accepted worldwide system for the staging of the fibrosis. So in one you just have perisinusoidal fibrosis. In two you have combination of perisinusoidal and the portal. In three you have the bridge, and four is complete cirrhosis. So if you look at this image, so this is mild perisinusoidal fibrosis in zone 3. Then this is the more evident perisinusoidal creepy fibrosis in between these steatotic hepatocytes, and this is again zone 3. Now this will even be little visible on the HE also, so that is stage 1B. If you have only portal, so that is stage 1C. Then if you have this combined zone 3 perisinusoidal fibrosis and portal, so that becomes a stage 2 fibrosis. And then if there is a bridge, so then you will call it a stage 3. Again, this bridge can be portal to portal, portal to central, or central to central. Then if you have complete nodule, so that is stage 4. So see in NAFLD, so one thing is that you are giving a confirmation of the diagnosis. Second thing is you are scoring the activity and the fibrosis stage assessment you are doing. Then you are ruling out the other differentials and the coexisting diseases. Then again, there are a lot of trials which are nowadays going out at many centers for the NAFLD cases, and then there is bariatric surgery. So you can compare your pre and post therapeutic samples also. So those are paired samples comparison. Now another question. So so Manasvi, maybe you can tell us which of the following feature other than steatosis is prominent in this image provided. So in
Ma'am,
this image, other than steatosis, what is prominent?
maybe ballooning degeneration, ma'am.
Yes, some ballooning degeneration. Anything else which is striking your eyes, which is very, very prominent?
Nuclear
Yes, so
glycogenization.
this is nuclear glycogenization. So very prominent nuclear glycogenization. So in diabetics, again, it is very, very prominent. But in most of your NAFLD cases, you will have nuclear glycogenization. Now, why I am highlighting this nuclear glycogenization? So people have gone into details of this, and they say that there are two types of nuclear glycogenization. So see, one is type 1. So type 1, this clearing is surrounded by a membrane kind of thing, and then you have this nuclear membrane. And then type 2 itself, actually, so it doesn't have a proper membrane outside it. So it can you see here? So type 1, so it has a membrane. The type 2 inclusion doesn't have a membrane, so it is just having that nuclear membrane outside. So the type 1, they are more rich in this ubiquitin, P62LC3B. These are all autophagy related proteins. So it has been seen that the type 1 inclusions are associated with bad and the advanced disease progression, because they are more associated with more of the autophagy. So that is the concept behind these two type of glycogenization. So in our case, like we were seeing this kind of glycogenization, it was actually complete clearing with no secondary membrane other than the nuclear membrane. Then, I think this is the next case. I think next student can take this.
Rajni, one sec. You like any comments from Dr. Rahul Shah till now? Anything you want? Shall we check with Dr. Rahul? Hi, Rahul.
Hi, I'm here. I'm here.
Would you like to comment on anything till now or for the students?
So I have one comment for Dr. Yadav. I think it's a very good presentation and teaching that you're doing. But what about the differential of macro and microvascular steatosis? Other causes, like people with who have corticosteroid-induced fatty liver, people with antiretrovirals. So how do you differentiate other causes of fatty liver other than metabolic parameters you're talking about? So there are other reasons for macro and microvascular steatosis.
Yeah, so we'll be going into the other causes soon. So we started with one of the most common cause here, which was non-alcoholic. So that was the case one. So we'll be going through the different causes, and I think then maybe we can discuss it.
Yeah,
So
so
once we
this,
go through the different other causes.
yeah, apologies. I thought you were going to discuss it later. I didn't know that. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, no, it's fine. It's completely fine. So actually, we had kept like some initial cases for students, so we wanted them to discuss. So this is the now second case, which we are
Sure.
doing.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Carry on. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
You would like to comment, Rahul? Would you like to comment anything from your side?
No, I think this is so common now to have fatty liver that we don't really biopsy the liver unless we really have to. So, as ma'am said before, that we have multiple ways of biopsying, but all of them are kind of invasive, expensive, and largely liver biopsy is limited to people with unexplained liver function test abnormalities. So either you have a transaminitis or you have cholestasis, which are persistent and we're not able to diagnose, then we would want to biopsy the liver. Otherwise, we rely on, as we said, modern testing, we rely on imaging, we rely on fibroscans. So having a liver biopsy of fatty liver is very unusual for us.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so we do have a very large chunk of these, but yes, yeah, Dr. Rahul is very correct. So yeah, in different centers, you will have a different load of these biopsies. Yes, so we have a high load because we have a lot of bariatric and trials going on for NAFLD. So currently at our center, so yes, that does influence the number of biopsies. So in classical cases, you don't need a biopsy. But if you have a persistent elevation and by the invasive test, if you have a query of the other differentials, so you have some differentials where you are not sure for the exact cause, then we need a biopsy. But it does vary from center to center. So despite we are having non-invasive investigations at our center, but I think that one major influence on our biopsy load is probably because we have a lot of trials and projects
being
going
a
on that. So
Yeah,
we have
being at AIIMS, AIIMS or a government hospital is easier to get a paired biopsy as
yes,
well. If you're doing a trial, but in a private center, it's practically
yeah,
impossible for us to
yes,
do a paired liver biopsy to see pre and post treatment.
yeah. So we saw all these paired biopsies actually in our bariatric patients. So with
Correct.
different kind of approaches, we saw the pre and post, and we actually had a regression. But they were good to see in that way that we had a regression of the fibrosis, regression of all the scoring. So yeah,
Wow.
it was quite informative and that way. So that is the advantage of that. Some project goes on, and then you get in-depth knowledge and the paired samples with that.
So now you'll have Mounjaro and Ozempic versus surgery. I don't think you'll have surgery anymore.
Yeah, so that has gone down. So with this
Yeah,
introduction of the medical agent, so it is decreasing, and it has started showing a decrease, a
sure.
considerable decrease at our institute also.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Carry on. Carry on.
Yeah. So I think the next student maybe you can. So this is the next case. This was case 3. So first was normal, second was NAFLD. Now this is case 3. So anyone who were allotted the case, can you just describe what can you see here?
Yeah, so this is a section from a
Yeah.
linear core of a liver tissue that is showing not a well-maintained architecture. That is, it is showing more of a nodular architecture.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
very good. That's a nodule. Yes.
like in previous case, this also shows macrovesicular steatosis.
Yes.
Can you go to more
Yes.
higher
Yes.
power?
Yeah. So that's another area of this biopsy. Here, what can you see?
And there is marked ballooning degeneration. And within that, there is abundant thick Mallory hyaline that is noted.
Okay, maybe this. Yeah, this is the higher part of that. So yes, this all pink is the Mallory tank bodies. Yeah. And can you just tell me
Intracytoplasm.
what are these structures? So these structures?
There is proliferation of the ducts.
Yeah, so these are ducts, and can you see this inflammation? So it is peculiar neutrophilic inflammation inside these ductal structures.
More of neutrophils are there that is
Yeah.
surrounding the hepatocytes.
So
So
what
neutrophilic
differences you can actually appreciate
satelloidosis.
in this case as compared to the previous case?
Previously, it was mixed inflammation that was seen, but here it is more neutrophilic. Uh,
Okay. Other than that, what other differences?
Other than that, fibrosis is also
Yeah, fibrosis is more. And this Melry dengue is also much more abundant than the previous. Yeah,
marked Mallory Lincoln bodies are seen.
yeah. So see, so that
Tier 2.
so this case is the alcoholic liver disease. So see, that is the difference between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. So that these are the chief causes of a steatotic pattern for a pathologist in a biopsy. So that's why I kept these cases in the starting. So here we have much more fibrosis. So this is a nodular liver. And this here is highlighting, see, these are the portal areas. So there is actually a dense inflammation and it is so much rich in neutrophils. Then these are all these duct and ductular proliferation. Again, so they are also stuffed with neutrophils. So if you have a neutrophilic inflammation in the lumen and the lining of the duct, so you call it a cholangitis. Okay, and if you have a lymphocytic damage, so you call it as a bile duct injury. So now this is a cholangitis. So alcoholics, they tend to have lot of neutrophilic inflammation. Now this is your lobular area. So all this pink ropey structures, so the hepatocytes are full of. This is all abundant and thick and ropey coarse Mallory dengue bodies. And look at this, these pale zones. So the here actually so you can't find any hepatocytes. So they are mostly swollen and they are full of Mallory. They are degenerating and they are rupturing. And then you have neutrophils surrounding them, and you have this pale fibrosis also, which is again eating these hepatocytes. So a combination of these features so tells you that actually it's a alcoholic steatohepatitis. Now, what else you can see in these patients? So that's at higher power. So this all deep pink structures. So that's the Mallory dengue bodies. And see the neutrophil. So neutrophilic satelloidosis I told you in the starting. So surrounding. So if the degenerated hepatocytes which are loaded with this Mallory, they are surrounded by neutrophils. So you call it a satelloidosis. Then you can see these mega mitochondria in alcoholic liver disease, and they are associated with a better prognosis. So in some studies have found that. And these are some of the surviving hepatocytes which are showing regenerative change. Now, how do you call something as regeneration in liver? Is that if the cells are bigger, they have more cytoplasm, nuclei are bigger, nucleoli are visible, then the binucleation and the multinucleation also tells you that they are trying to regenerate. Now, other unique features to alcoholic, again, see, it also has a creepy fibrosis, but in NAFLD it is more subtle, and in alcoholic liver disease it becomes much more dense and it completely actually eats up the hepatocytes. Another thing which is not seen in non-alcoholic liver disease is this cholestasis. So in alcoholics, they have this combination of cholestasis with the regular steatohepatitis. Now that's the Mason trichrome. So we can see the nodules here. And other than nodules, this blue fibrosis, which is creeping in between the hepatocytes. And then the Mallory hyaline also does get highlighted with a Mason's trichrome stain. So that becomes little better visible rather than a HE. Now, what this Mallory is actually composed of, so it is degenerated cytokeratin filaments and the heat shock protein. So you can sometimes do this IHC also to highlight, but it is not necessary. So the Mallory hyalin is well made out on the HNE stain. Then another pattern which we can see in alcoholics is this foamy degeneration. Foamy degeneration, that means the hepatocytes are swollen and they are having these tiny, tiny vacuoles inside them. Now, this is actually this is something like a microvesicular steatosis, and this is a bad pattern. So this is associated with a worse disease outcome. So in the alcoholic liver disease, so yes, so most of the time, see, you will not get biopsies at the early stage when they are steatotic. So yes, you do get sometimes when they are steatohepatitic, and most of the time at our center, we get biopsies from alcoholics when they are at the cirrhosis and they develop acute on chronic liver failure. So they already have a CLD and then they have a superimposed disease which has led to a decompensation. And at that times, yes, and in the when they need a transplant. So you tend to get the biopsies from the patients. Then in non-alcoholic, whereas so yes, see if you compare alcoholic with non-alcoholic, so majority of the patients in the non-alcoholic they have this pure steatosis. Then some they have this associated inflammation, and some out of that they progress to advanced fibrosis and a HCC or a decompensation. But with the if you compare and see the data at the transplant center, so yes, now people are seeing more and more advanced presentation with the NAFLD or the MAFLD nowadays. So that is about the current change in the nomenclature. So which happened over from last few years, it has been finished. So whatever we used to call as NAFLD now is being labeled as MASLD. Why? Because see, earlier name was non-alcoholic. So that means which is not associated with alcohol, which is not a correct way. So the correct way is to tell that if the patient has some cardiometabolic risk factors and has a steatosis, and we feel that steatosis is related to this dysfunction, so it becomes a metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease. And if you have inflammation with this steatosis, you call it MASH, steatohepatitis, which is associated with metabolic dysfunction. Then if there are patients who have a significant alcohol consumption and they have risk factor of MASLD, so a combination of a non-alcoholic and alcoholic, you label as MET-ALD. Then if you have a steatosis and you can't find a known cause, so you will call it a cryptogenic. That means you don't know the cause of steatosis. Now that's one question to the third case student, the other student, that which of the following diseases shows presence of Mallory-Denk bodies? So these are the options: alcoholic liver disease, primary biliary cholangitis, Wilson's, or all of the above. So can you answer? The case 3 was allotted to which student? So any student who was allotted case 3, can you please tell?
All of above.
Yeah. So seeing Mallory, you cannot just label a diagnosis as alcoholic. So yes, the cholestatic diseases, they tend to show Mallory hyalin. Again, Wilson's can also show Mallory hyalin. If you see the children, so Indian childhood cirrhosis, Wilson's, they can show. So yes, it can be seen with other things, but yes, in alcoholics, it is much more abundant. So that is the difference, and it is much more coarse also. And why this is known as this Mallory-Denk body? So after the name of these two individuals, Mallory, he actually discovered these bodies in the hepatocytes of patients with alcoholic hepatitis, whereas Denk, he developed the first animal model for Mallory bodies. So that's why, so these kind of this deposition is named after these two individuals. So that was about the non-alcoholic and alcoholic. So we'll go to some more causes that, so see, so viral hepatitis. So when I was a resident, so that was much more a common cause of steatosis. And if we compare all viral hepatitis, so it is more commonly associated with hepatitis C than even B. When you have combination of hepatitis, then you have this even more frequent. So again, so you should not forget about the viral hepatitis, that it does causes a steatotic picture. Then another cause, like Dr. Rahul, so he was telling about, so in today's era, so drug, that's a very, very important cause of fatty liver disease. And this is just like 10 drugs I mentioned, but there is list of like 100 of drugs which can cause fatty liver diseases. So starting from drugs which are used in cardiology, neurology, and all your hormonal drugs, and for the rheumatoid arthritis. So for all the rheumatology drugs, then skin diseases, you have these plenty of the drugs which can induce the steatotic pattern in the liver biopsy. Now, what do you do? So, if the patient is having a systemic disease and he is on some of the drugs which are known to induce fatty liver, so we need to see their cumulative drug levels and monitor with the LFT so that they don't develop a advanced liver disease due to that. So, but this is it is very very important to take the history for the drugs, and so what they are taking, how long they are taking, so that we can match that profile with the LFT and the liver biopsy. They can actually, so drug is a differential on every liver biopsy and with any pattern. So this is a methotrexate induced NAFLD kind of pattern, whereas the other picture here is highlighting amiodarone induced alcoholic liver disease like pattern. So drug can induce any pattern. So most common pattern with the drugs is cholestatic pattern, but you do have these steatotic pattern. At times you have these vascular patterns. So drug induced liver injury is always a differential in any liver biopsy you see. Then not only obese people have steatotic liver. So yes, all these malabsorption causes, so the malnutrition, then acute weight loss, TPN in children, again the short bowel and celiac disease, pancreatic diseases, they can lead to steatosis. Then the endocrine disorders, pregnancy associated, and nowadays lot of environmental toxins, they are also important cause of steatotic pattern. Then comes the little uncommon, but yes, still very prevalent, and we tend to see so in even adults and children, the genetic diseases. So these are several causes. So once you can't find an exact cause with all your investigations and the examination, so yes, the last thing to resort is to look for the genetic causes, which are also now with the availability of the sequencing and the exome sequencing, especially from the blood samples. So we are finding more and more genetic causes also in the steatotic liver diseases. So we shall go through some more cases. So here we can see that there is a liver biopsy which is nodular, and see it is very very blue. So it tells that it is a hepatitic pattern. So it's an inflammatory pattern. Okay. And then this is the portal area. And if we look at the inflammation, so this inflammation is actually crossing the limiting plate and damaging the hepatocytes which are adjacent to that. So that's the limiting plate, and limiting plate has become irregular. So normally it is a very straight, but now it has become, see, very zigzag and wavy. If we look at the hepatocytes, they are very swollen. Again, the inflammation is there in the lobules. Again, now look at hepatocytes here. So they are forming this flower or rosette or the acinar kind of structures. And look at the plasma cells, they are prominent. These are ductules which are proliferating. So we have this autoimmune hepatitis pattern, and there is a little fat. So what happens in autoimmune hepatitis that you actually you don't have really a significant fat, but at times these people may be treated with steroids, and some of them will have significant fat. And also nowadays we get patients which have a dual etiology, so autoimmune hepatitis with a steatotic liver disease, so with a significant fat. So if the fat is very very significant in a AIH, so you have to tell the clinician that underlying steatotic liver disease is also on the cards. So there may be two diseases which are influencing the liver. Again, another example here, we have got a nodular liver. And if we see around the nodule, so we have significant inflammation, a bile duct injury, ductal proliferation. So that's the hepatitic pattern. And if we look inside the lobule, so we have a very, very significant amount of fat with this ballooning degeneration. So we have got a combination of actually autoimmune hepatitis and a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So this patient, she's a patient of SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus, and then she got this progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. So this biopsy came from neurology. So she had this combination of autoimmune hepatitis and a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Then another example, if we see here, so everybody I think can see these pale areas. So these are the fatty areas, but we do have these blue areas. So that is again inflammation. So what pattern this is? It's a combined steatotic and a hepatitic pattern. And but see in other areas, so we have got these multiple granulomas, very, very well defined. We have these giant cells inside, and see there is no necrosis, but there are numerous granulomas. And these granulomas are not associated with the fat, So obviously they are not lipogranulomas. And this is the lobular area. So in the lobular area, if we see, so we have fat, we have ballooning, some nuclear glycogenization. So in the lobule, I would have made a diagnosis of NAFLD. But see, in the portal area, I have got so many granulomas. So that means that this patient has a dual pattern. So these are again granulomas and NAFLD changes. Then again, see, in the portal areas, you have significant plasma cells, interphase hepatitis. So it's a hepatitic pattern with granulomas with this steatotic. And look at the fibrosis, portal fibrosis, again some chicken wire kind of fibrosis in the lobule, in the perisinusoidal region. So that's a sarcoidosis with a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So that's how. So in these scenarios nowadays we get a lot of biopsies, because the investigations and the presentation and everything is telling you that that is not falling into one thing. So we have something which is odd for the one etiology, and you tend to get a biopsy. Again, in this case, this is another, and again we have lot of fat here, so lot of vacuoles. And see, again we have got granulomas. How these granulomas are now different? These are necrotizing. You have Langerhans giant cell, you have plenty of necrosis, but see, lot of fat. Again, this hepatitic picture in the portal areas. And see here, you have got this ballooning and the pale kind of look, and then significant fibrosis again. So again, you have got a hepatitic pattern with large necrotizing granulomas and a steatotic pattern. So this was a case of tuberculosis with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now here we see again a nodular pattern. So we have got fibrosis here, and these are the nodules. And look at some other areas. Here we have got hemorrhagic necrosis. Now, this biopsy is from a patient of acute on chronic liver failure. So he had a CLD due to hepatitis, and this is the acute thing. So the terminal hemorrhagic necrosis which has happened. So this is the cirrhotic liver, and this is the hemorrhagic necrosis in the one of the lobule. Now, if we look at the ducts, we have these bile plugs. So they are related to the sepsis in the patient. And if we see these some viable areas, so zone 3 is necrotic and adjacent steatotic hepatocytes. So zone 3 actually, so mostly comes first when there is a limited blood supply and hypoxia or anoxia, and the adjacent viable hepatocytes, they tend to show steatosis. And in the areas where the hepatocytes, they go off, so you have these steroid laden macrophages. So see, again the multiple factors are operating here. So he had a CLD, then there is a terminal anoxia and the sepsis. So you have got a acute on chronic kind of a picture. So this was hepatitic with heart failure and sepsis. Now another case, again we have got these pale areas and the fat vacuoles everywhere. Then this is the portal area, some ductal proliferation. Now can you see some foamy kind of cells? See, in between the hepatocytes you have these foamy macrophages, and they have something inside them which is very giving this foamy appearance. So you do a PAS-D, so that is always done on a liver biopsy at our center, and we did additional SM. So you have these numerous histoplasma which are there stuffed in these the macrophages. And see, so the disseminated histoplasmosis was the main diagnosis. However, the pattern induced by this organism in the liver was a steatotic pattern. So you see, that is, see, so the patterns, how deceptive they can be. So the same pattern can be seen in with different kind of situations or the diseases. Then if we go to the children, so we have a completely different scenario there. So see, in pediatric population, yes, the incidence of NAFLD is increasing, like in the West, in our country also. Now these children, they can have either adult type NAFLD, which is focused on zone 3, or they may have a pediatric pattern, that means focused on zone 1. Now what is focused on zone 1? So in children, so the steatosis, ballooning, inflammation, everything will be around this portal areas. So it will be a zone 1 focus disease. Again, the fibrosis will also focus on that. Now, if the child is, say, little 9-10 years obese, so it is fine that you go for a NAFLD kind of a diagnosis. Now, this is another child, again, see, very pale, very fatty looking liver. So this was, I think this was also allotted to 2 of the students. So can any of the student tell us the case number 4, which I had given? Case number 4.
Ma'am, the case number 4 was of a 4-year-old male with hepatomegaly and mildly elevated OTPT.
Yeah.
So in the first slide, it was a HE stained slide showing multiple liver cores, showing macrovascular steatosis,
Yes.
ductular reaction, and mild lobular inflammation.
Yeah, so these are other images. So the predominant thing you see is a steatosis. And other than that, so can you see the fibrosis here? What kind of fibrosis is this?
There's bridging
Yeah.
fibrosis in empty stain.
Yes. And in PAS, you can see some, so magenta pink area. So that means there is some glycogen in the hepatocytes which don't have fat. So the fat one are shining out differently, and the residual which don't have fat, they have some glycogen. And
Yes,
then
ma'am.
that has gone in the PAS with diastase, it is completely empty. Now, do you want to make a diagnosis of NAFLD in this child?
Ma'am, it is possible.
But if I say that 4 years child, non-obese child, this piece I kept, that's why. So if the age is less than 10, I will say, and especially the child is not obese. So in a less age, you should not keep a differential of NAFLD. So yes, it is very, very less common unless you get a proper that the child is obese. So what is more common in these children is this. So inherited metabolic liver disease. A predominantly steatotic pattern in a child. So you have to look for the inherited metabolic liver diseases. There are plenty of causes for that. So these people will need a exome sequencing. Now that's another example of the child. See here, again we have got steatosis, but other than steatosis in this child, again see hepatosplenomegaly, a small child. So it's like a 3-4 year kind of a child. And look at the other hepatocytes. Is there any unique appearance to the other hepatocytes which do not have fat? Do they look different rather than normal? So they have this crushed ground glass kind of appearance. So this appearance we see in viral hepatitis. So this finely ground glass. And see the empty is also highlighting these cells. So this ground glass kind of appearance. Again, see in the past, you have these steatotic hepatocytes and you have these deeply pink. So the ground glass hepatocytes are being highlighted here with the empty and the past. So this patient was a case of a glycogen storage disease. So the all these inherited actually the diseases, the metabolic liver disease and different kind of storage disorders. So they can show steatosis, but yes, the amount of steatosis in GSD is less. And this is type 4 GSD, which had little more steatosis and a ground glass appearance. So again, in children, the approach has to be different. That's another example. See a child again having some steatosis. So this ballooned kind of hepatocytes, and see there is some cholestasis, so there is some this granular kind of degeneration in the cytoplasm of the hepatocytes. Then this is extramedullary hematopoiesis, a giant cell transformation, and see minimal fibrosis. So when we looked at the other systems of this child, so yes, he did have systemic problems. So it was a arthrogryposis, renal dysfunction, cholestasis syndrome. So in children, yes, we need to have a different approach, I will say. And when you see steatosis, so all the adult differentials, they are out, and you enter a different set of differential activities. That is how you need to go in the children. Then here we see an example. So this is same patient, liver biopsy, kidney biopsy, and the lung biopsy. Now can you see here? So these are beautiful bullae inclusions, nuclear inclusions here in the hepatocytes, same in the tubular cells in the kidney, and also in the alveolar, so pneumocytes in the lung. And see the CMV IHC. So a disseminated CMV infection, and see that in the liver, what picture it is inducing, a steatotic pattern. So I will say that yes, when you look at the pattern, so you have, based upon the clinical scenario, you have to narrow down to the differentials. And the other things which, yes, Wilson's in adult and children both can induce a steatotic pattern. Alpha-1 antitrypsin in children can have a steatotic pattern. Again, all of these, I told you, inherited diseases, lysosomal acid lipase deficiency, that can be a cause of this pattern. So, I think, can you tell about this question? So that's the last question I have. Liver biopsy in a 5-year non-obese child with hepatomegaly. So which should be the first differential diagnosis out of these four?
Inherited or metabolic liver disease.
So yes, in children, you have to have a different approach. Once you see the form and you know that it is a child, so your mind has to work differently. So if I want to summarize that, how to approach. So yes, you do see at lot of things, as Dr. Rahul told. So at our center we have full LFT. We always get our cap. So and the LSM values to. So we know the amount of the steatosis and the fibrosis. Non-invasive investigation has told. Then we have all the viral workup. We have the autoimmune workup. Then the preliminary Wilson's workup, that is the urinary copper and the KF ring examination, ceruloplasmin, and then the drug history, if there, and then the systemic disease history. Is patient is having malabsorption, again the celiac workup and the malabsorption workup. So and the portal hypertension, the MRCP in the ductal diseases. So all that is needed. It is not just upon the basis of biopsy. So you do have a whole lot of workup for the non-neoplastic liver diseases. So in adult it goes like that. And then in children, again what becomes more important is the family history, the sibling history. So because in them, yes, the inherited causes, they go up as compared to the adults. So you need to have a different diagnostic approach for both the populations, and you need to correlate and look at all other things to label. So you will have a pattern, but then to go to the exact etiology of that pattern, you need to correlate all your findings with the different clinical laboratory and the imaging parameters. So that is the summary. And so take home. So whenever you find a steatotic pattern, just see what type of the steatosis it is, what is the percentage, what is the distribution or the zone, then whether steatosis is the predominant thing or whether it is just a part of other things. So the other things, the associated things have to be seen. So the inflammation, the ducts, the vessels. So there is a way of approaching a liver biopsy. So you see all the structures. You look at the portal areas, then you go to the lobules. So you see one by one every structure. Then the fibrosis, again the pattern of the fibrosis, the amount. And this is all workup which you will correlate to go to the exact etiology of that disease. So I have shown you some macrovesicular. So microvesicular steatosis, that is less common in the practice. So yes, in the Reye syndrome that may be seen, and it's a more poor prognosis pattern than the macrovesicular steatosis, I will say. So yes, you have to see whether it is macro or micro, and in macro whether it is small droplet or large droplet, and then the distribution and associated features. So it's just a broad pattern, and then you want to narrow down to the exact differentials. So thank you. Dr. Rahul.
Thank you, ma'am.
Um,
Hi, Rahul. You there? I think he's joining. Rahul is just taking a minute. He disconnected and he's joining again. Anyways, Rajini, you have any final comments for the students on this topic? You can just take a minute.
I think they saw them very nicely. So the first, second, third, all were they have made correctly. And the fourth was a child. So even pediatric liver biopsies are practiced at very less centers in our country. So as compared to the adult hepatology, which is much more well developed and practiced, so pediatric is even at lesser centers. So I know that even some institutes may not be having pediatric hepatology at all. So even in AIIMS, we started, I think when I became a faculty, so after me, we started this pediatric hepatology. And now we have a whole chunk, a big load of that. And what I feel after practicing that adult and pediatric patients have to be completely differently evaluated. And even the biopsies, once you get, so you have to see that scenario, and it's completely different approach in both the age groups. So as per age group, it's completely different.
Yeah, Miss, you have any students? Do you have any questions or comments for madam? Or are there any questions in the audience, in the chat box? Namrata, anything you have?
Yes, sir. I have two questions. One is in NAFLD, why is the presence of inflammatory cells not considered as steatohepatitis? I think particular to the case that you had shown us, ma'am.
Okay. So in NAFLD, what happens is, so since we take a lot of biopsies from NAFLD, per se it is not needed, but yes, in our center we have a high chunk. So in NAFLD, mostly in the early stages, you only have fat. Then once you start having inflammation, the portal inflammation is not at all important. In NAFLD, the lobular inflammation is graded. So because it is a very zone-based disease, so the inflammation also comes in that pattern. So inflammation comes in zone 3 first. So that lobular inflammation is graded, and the portal inflammation is not as such much in NAFLD, except when these patients reach the stage of cirrhosis, they do have significant portal inflammation. But the chunk of patients which you see in India, so mostly you will have actually the more fat and less of inflammation, less of ballooning, and in the early stage. So now with the transplant, yes, the big transplant load centers, they are seeing some advanced NAFLs and all, in which portal inflammation may increase. So, but in the grading system, you have to just grade based upon the lobular inflammation, which is there around the hepatocytes.
Got it, ma'am. Thank you. Dr. Surabhi asks for some explanation on mega mitochondria.
Okay, so see, mega mitochondria, though there are like lot of papers and research studies on that, but in practice, we also infrequently see presence of mega mitochondria in alcoholic liver disease. You really have to hunt for it. But yes, the studies indicate that if you see mega mitochondria, they are associated with a better prognosis as compared to in people in whom you don't see mega mitochondria. But per se, it is not essential for diagnosis, and it's an uncommonly seen finding in alcoholic liver disease as compared to the other findings.
I can see Rahul here. Hi, Rahul.
Hi, I'm here.
Any final comments for our residents, young residents of pathology? Any messages for them?
I think this is such a common condition now. It is incredibly common. It's going to be kind of almost like an epidemic in the next, 10, 20 years to come. You'll see a lot more liver biopsies. You'll see a lot more disease. The thing which I would like to, see in the future is how do you correlate the rise in your enzymes? So when we see a transaminitis, twice the upper limit of normal or 3 times the upper limit normal, how does it correlate to your histopathological, from steatosis to steatohepatitis to fibrosis? So is there a way we know that these enzymes, they could be 100, they could be 300, of course, we know is causing inflammation in the hepatocytes, but is there a way of grading that we have somebody with XMY, transaminitis, how bad is the liver actually on histopathology? Because that is the ultimate game. So when we do a ultrasound, they say fatty liver to everybody, 1 grade, 1, 2, 3. That's purely, black and white imaging. Then you have a fibroscan, which again is limited by the fact that the fibroscan only checks one particular place in the liver, the right lobe in one particular place. Then we have the MR elastography, which is a bit better, but again, it can miss focal fat sparing, focal fibrosis, scarring. So there are a lot of things to evolve in the future, but it will take a lot of effort for us to clinically tell us, look, this is the problem in the liver, this is what we should do. But a lot of people that we see present to us in a cirrhotic stage. So fatty liver presenting as upfront cirrhosis is so incredibly common. It's not even funny. Forget alcohol. That is, of course, documented. But there are a whole host of people who come with a GI bleed, portal hypertension, people who come with ascites, jaundice, and we just don't know they're cirrhotic. And the liver function tests often tend to be normal. So if you see, 90% of the people, they will not have a transaminase rise in the end stage. They'll have a burnt out liver. So there is no transaminitis. There's only a low albumin level, low platelet count, or a complication of liver disease that we find.
Yeah, and in the liver biopsies also, so we have problems. So in burnt out cases like which Dr. Rahul is telling, so there is a problem. Fat tends to go down. So you have cirrhosis, now you have inflammation, and the fat goes off. So it is more difficult to make out that they were NAFLD to start from. So that is another pitfall. So that has happened. So if you see the explants from these patients who have turned cirrhotic, it is more difficult even to make out.
Yeah, true. So they could have, we see a lot also burnt out autoimmune in young people.
Yeah.
So we have young women especially who present with cirrhosis. So it's very hard to differentiate because you don't see any fat in the liver anymore. So
yes.
Interesting. Liver pathology is very interesting, actually. Not easy for us either.
I'm so lucky that I don't deliver pathology. I'm far away. I always
And
found
you
it.
don't have actually see what so renal like so many people. So I have also done a lot of renal in my residency. So they have at least immunofluorescence, EM, and lot of markers. And in liver, we are still with the same spatial stains, and the differentials and the diseases have changed over years. And we tend to see only those stains, and then we have to change our approach of seeing over years as the diseases even are being like
Yeah,
studied more and more.
that's what Rahul was saying. So many diagnostic modalities have come, even your enzymes and other, you have to maybe put everything together.
Yeah.
So, I mean, science is, yeah.
It's very
So we are
complex
lucky
because
actually. So we get a lot of workup done from our gastroenterologist and hepatologist. So we are really happy with them that way. So
so
that
we
is
only
highly
ask for
recommended.
biopsy really end stage. We have people with, Ayurvedic medicines, herbs, vitamins, minerals, supplements. There's so much happening in the world, flavors, preservatives,
Yeah.
keloid during COVID.
Yes.
There's so many things which have had liver insult that to actually, figure out what has happened to the patient, it's a good history. If you can kind of find out what's happened in the history, you will get the answer. So when we do a liver biopsy, we actually write down this is all that has been happening. A drug, antibiotic, a painkiller, something new, now the day and age of immune modulators, cancer
Yeah.
therapies, everything has a problem with the, side effect in liver, histopathology. Very hard to find out. Very, very hard. We get a new referral every single day, especially from the oncology department. They've used drugs, they've had some side effects, and they're saying, hang on, what's happened? The only thing we can tell you is stop the drug and see.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important, I think, to conclude. Rahul, thank you very much. Rajni, you have any final point to say or anything you want to say?
No, drug is just always a differential in every liver biopsy for residents. It's always.
True.
My moderators, Namrata, you have anything, any comments?
Sir, I can see two more questions in the audience,
Yeah,
if I may
yeah.
address them.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Dr. Deepa asks how to differentiate ballooning from feathery degeneration. I think ma'am
Okay.
had covered that, but yeah.
Yeah. So ballooning is a swollen hepatocyte. So cytoplasm is degenerated. But if you can see a granular look in it, so that means bile is there. So it becomes a feathery degeneration. So feathery is actually a different form of ballooning, which is associated with bile stasis. So it's more granular. So that is the only difference.
Thank you, ma'am. She also asks whether we should use the term NAFLD or MASLD in our HPE impressions.
Yeah. So it has been changed. So we have shifted. So we are now using MASLD. So MASLD and MASH. So if you don't have a significant inflammation, you use MASLD or MAFLD. And you have significant inflammation, so you use MASH. So yes, there is a shift of terminology, and we also have changed in our pathology reporting system. We have shifted our term.
Thank you, ma'am. One question from me, since we did mention chemotherapy, there is an entity called chemotherapy-associated steatohepatitis. So, is that interpreted similar to any other drug-induced liver disease, or does it have any different approach?
Yeah, so with the drug, we also do like that. We take a detailed history because they can induce different kind of changes, maybe a hepatitic or steatotic or combination, even cholestatic changes, and across not in liver only. So in GI also, we are getting lot of biopsies. The patients who are on chemotherapy, like sir told, so immune checkpoint inhibitors and all, and then they have this very fast turnover. What common to every site I have seen, the patient who are on chemotherapy, they have a very very fast cell turnover, so you tend to see a lot of this apoptosis and regenerative changes also. So that I think is a soft pointer. You should always see if you have a more mitosis or apoptosis, something like that, going on in these tissues without cancer. So that means it is due to therapy. So we do correlate and we stop the drugs and we titrate and we see and change the drugs, alternate drugs, then they are shifted once they have significant liver dysfunction or GI dysfunction. So that way, but it has to be done in close correlation with the clinical. So you have to discuss, you have to do MDTs. So yeah, I didn't tell. So see, every week we have specifically liver MDTs are done every week only for non-neoplastic diseases. So it's very, very important to discuss the cases with the clinicians. So we do discuss like 50% of our cases, they go back to discussion. So in a
Thank you,
week,
ma'am.
we get like something like we always have minimum 10 biopsies. So 10 to 20 maybe is the biopsy every week, and we discuss. That's why we end up discussing 50% of the cases every week.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, role of oil red O in assessing fat in cadaveric liver biopsy.
Okay, so oil red O can be used if you are confused. So we don't do it every day because fat vacuoles can be easily made out on HE stain, and they are very, very well defined. But if you are confused that it is an artifact, whether it's a fat vacuole, you may do, but you need to wash off the tissue. So you need to wash off the formalin, and then you need to do a frozen section kind of section, and then do oil red O. So that may be done. We do for sometimes for something like research purposes and all, but in practice actually HE is very good and stain to identify. So HE and MT I think solves the problem in majority of the liver biopsies. I'll say majority of the liver diseases you can do with those stains.
Okay. And one last question, ma'am. Morphological features to identify regeneration.
Okay, so for regeneration, the increase in the amount of cytoplasm, more deep pink color to the cytoplasm, then again the bigger nuclei, and then the prominence of nucleoli, macronucleoli something, then binucleation, multinucleation, and even the thickness of the hepatic cord. So hepatocyte cord thickness if increases, that also, and even this SNR transformation, this is also a way to regenerate. So whenever the hepatocytes are damaged, so liver has this constant capacity of and the actually unique feature of regeneration. So as it is damaged, so it always tries to regenerate. Again, this SNR transformation also tells you regeneration. And even some people in research studies have found that even this nuclear glycogenization is also associated, and it's also indirect evidence of regeneration.
Rahul, you there?
So these are the ways.
Yeah.
Rahul, if I have understood you correctly, the number of liver biopsies, the procedures have come down in practice?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, when I started in the 1990s to now, I mean, there would be at least like a 70% reduction because our testing for autoantibodies for autoimmune hepatitis, for Wilson's, for, hemochromatosis, viral markers, clear drug-induced, things, we don't rely on liver biopsies as much and as easily as we did before. One is costing to some extent. Number two is consenting patients who said, look, let's wait and see what happens. In the olden days, it was much easier to convince patients, let's do a biopsy, see what's happening under the microscope. It's a gold standard. Nothing can beat that. But we find it very hard to convince, and the cost has gone up. So, and if you have one complication from an elective liver biopsy, it's quite, heartbreaking.
So which are the common indications for liver biopsy in your practice now?
So I only largely, if you have basically a quite a significant transaminitis without a clear cause, then we do it. Somebody with a subacute liver failure who, we're working up urgently, we would want to biopsy. Again, as ma'am said, explanted liver is very important. People, of course, we need to know what's happened to them. But again, it's very largely limited. We do not check for Hep B, C. No autoimmune markers would lead us to doing liver biopsy, nothing really except unexplained liver function test.
Rajni, anything you want to comment, or then we can otherwise call it a day? Final comments,
Yeah.
Rajni?
Yeah, I think that's all from my side.
Okay.
I think, and we have answered all the questions of the attendees
Yes,
also.
we have. I think there are still 95 students sitting in the room, Rajni. They don't want to leave you, and you and Rahul. But I think it's already 8:30. Thank you very much, Rahul and Rajni, for your time and making it so interesting and a lively discussions, and students also, and Namrata and my moderators too.